The sun was just beginning its descent, casting long, dappled shadows through the maple and alder trees that lined the riverbank. Max, a lean shepherd mix with matted tan fur and wary amber eyes, trotted along the muddy shore, nose to the ground in search of anything edible. He'd been on his own for weeks, surviving off discarded scraps and the occasional wandering traveler's kindness. Hunger gnawed at his ribs, but he pressed on, driven by a stubborn spark of hope. Upstream, hidden behind a curtain of wild blackberry brambles, a young black bear cub named Kodiak pawed at a patch of bright red berries. His fur was still speckled with gold from the late afternoon sun, and his dark, curious eyes darted between the fruit and the rushing water. Normally cautious, Kodiak's belly rumbled louder than his instincts whispered stay back, and he leaned forward, plucking a berry with a clumsy swipe of his paw. Suddenly, a loose stone beneath Max's paw gave way. With a startled yelp, the dog tumbled into the river, the current instantly wrapping around him like a merciless ribbon. He thrashed desperately, ears pinned back, legs churning against the swift flow. His frantic cries rose over the roar of the water and echoed through the trees. Kodiak froze for a heartbeat, torn between fear and an urge he didn't understand. Then, with surprising agility, he plunged into the icy water. The cold bit at his fur, but he didn't hesitate. Paddling furiously, he reached Max in moments that felt like hours. The cub nudged the dog's side, guiding him toward a fallen log that lay half-submerged nearby. Max latched on with his jaws, and Kodiak heaved with all his strength, pulling them both toward shore. They collapsed onto the muddy bank, hearts pounding with adrenaline. Max shook himself fiercely, sending droplets of water glittering through the air. Kodiak lay panting beside him, chest heaving, his ears pressed flat in exhaustion. For several long seconds neither moved, until Max gave a small, grateful whine and pressed his muzzle against Kodiak's shoulder in silent thanks. As the sky deepened into shades of purple and orange, the two strangers sat side by side. Neither spoke, but an unspoken understanding passed between them, two creatures, each alone in their own way, saved by an act of compassion. The river's gentle murmur lulled them, and for the first time in many days, Max closed his eyes without worry, trusting that this night at least, he was not alone. Dawn broke over the forest the next morning, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. Max stirred first, his muscles aching pleasantly from yesterday's ordeal. He shook off the dew clinging to his coat and padded over to where Kodiak lay curled among a bed of fallen leaves. The bear cub's chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths, still exhausted from his heroic swim. Max nosed the cub gently, earning a quiet grunt before Kodiak opened one sleepy eye and offered a tentative nuzzle in return. As the sun climbed higher, warming the damp earth, Kodiak rose to his paws and led the way deeper into the woods. Max followed, ears perked and tail wagging low in cautious excitement. Every snapped twig and rustling fern made the dog pause, but he found courage in Kodiak's calm presence. The cub moved with deliberate confidence, sniffing at the underbrush and tapping the ground with his heavy paw as though saying, "This way." After a short trek, Kodiak stopped at a cluster of wild raspberries dangling from thorny canes. He nosed aside a few leaves and plucked a berry with surprising delicacy, then looked back at Max, his dark eyes bright with invitation. Max hesitated. Fruit had never been more than an odd scent on the breeze, but hunger outweighed caution. He leaned forward, gently bit into the ripe berry, and felt its sweet juice burst on his tongue. Kodiak let out a low rumble, the forest's version of laughter, and sat back on his haunches, watching Max's delight. Their fragile rapport deepened over the next hours. Max discovered that Kodiak's presence meant safety. When a low growl from a distant peccary sent Max's hackles rising, Kodiak stood his ground, shoulders broad, and the rustling sounds faded. In turn, Kodiak found companionship in Max's fearless exuberance. When a bumblebee buzzed too close, Kodiak froze, then hopped back with a surprised snort as Max barked emphatically, sending the bee away. Each helped the other navigate the forest's small perils. Late afternoon light filtered through the canopy as Kodiak guided Max to a hidden glade carpeted with moss and dotted with wild strawberries. Here, the bear cub demonstrated how to push aside the mossy carpet to reveal the sweetest fruits. Max followed suit, his tail wagging faster each time he discovered a patch. Full at last, they lay side by side, Kodiak's massive paws occasionally brushing Max's flank in a gesture of camaraderie, and Max resting his head against Kodiak's warm, furred side. In the hush of the glade, they understood that this curious friendship born of crisis was beginning to root itself in genuine trust in shared discovery. By late September, the forest was settling into its autumn hush. Maple leaves glowed like embers under the midday sun, and a crisp edge had crept into the breeze. Max and Kodiak moved through the trees with an easy confidence born of weeks spent side by side. They foraged for acorns and mushrooms, took long afternoon rests in sunlit clearings, and hunted the occasional rabbit together. Kodiak's stealth and strength paired perfectly with Max's speed and eagerness. But as the days shortened, new threats emerged. One afternoon, the low, mournful howls of a wolf pack drifted through the pines. Max froze mid-stride, fur bristling along his spine. Kodiak stiffened beside him, every muscle coiled. Far off, three pale shapes circled a fallen elk, their eyes burning with hunger. Kodiak stepped forward in a silent challenge, his roar echoing like distant thunder. Max barked in fierce tandem, his sharp yaps slicing through the tension. The wolves paused, uncertain at first. No single dog nor lone cub could drive them off, but standing side by side, Kodiak's bulk and Max's defiance spoke of unity and courage. After a tense standoff, the wolves slinked back into the shadows, deciding this was not the easy kill they'd hoped for. Just when they felt the danger had passed, smoke curled through the treetops on the horizon. A careless campfire had ignited a patch of dry underbrush, and a ribbon of flame grew rapidly in the parched forest. The air filled with heat and the crackle of burning leaves. Max whimpered in alarm, nostrils flaring as ash drifted like gray snow around them. Kodiak sniffed the acrid air, eyes darting to the path ahead. He nudged Max insistently, urging him to follow. They raced through the burning undergrowth, Kodiak's powerful legs clearing fallen logs in giant leaps while Max zigzagged to avoid low branches and the worst of the flames. Embers stung their fur, and the roar of fire threatened to overwhelm their senses. At one point a burning branch fell across their path. Kodiak smashed it aside with a mighty swipe, sending sparks flying, and Max dove under the ember-scorched barrier with an agile roll. Together they pushed on, lunging over a narrow creek just as the fire licked at its far bank. In that moment, as the two hearts pounded in unison, Max realized this was no longer about who was stronger or faster, it was about trust. When they finally emerged onto a blackened clearing, rain began to fall, first in sullen drops, then in a steady sheet that hissed against the dying flames. Kodiak lifted his muzzle to the sky, roaring with relief, while Max danced in the puddles, tongue lolling in exhilaration. Wet, tired, and singed, they collapsed side by side. Kodiak licked Max's ear in a gesture of solidarity, and Max pressed his head against Kodiak's side, grateful to be alive. As night fell, the forest was silent but for the drip of water and the distant crackle of dying embers. Max and Kodiak huddled together, two unlikely friends bonded not only by kindness but by shared peril. In the glow of the cooling coals, they understood that their friendship had become something far greater than the sum of its parts, a living testament to courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable strength found in standing together against the odds. Winter arrived with a sudden ferocity, blanketing the forest in thick, unrelenting snow. Each breath of air tasted like ice, and the once vibrant maples stood bare, their skeletal branches groaning under the weight of frost. Kodiak and Max had grown accustomed to facing danger together, but this season would test them in a way neither could have foreseen. One frozen morning, as a pale sun struggled to pierce the gray sky, Kodiak padded ahead of Max, following a deer trail beneath a canopy of hoarfrost. Without warning, a sharp snap echoed through the trees. Kodiak let out a yelp of pain and stumbled, one of his massive black paws caught in a steel foothold trap, its jaws clamped cruelly around his leg. Max charged forward, fur bristling with panic, but stopped at the edge of the clearing. He barked desperately, circling Kodiak, who lay panting in the snow, flecks of crimson staining the white blanket. The cub's eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were glazed with shock and pain. Max nosed at the trap, whining, but the cold metal would not yield. Before Max could summon the strength to pry it open, distant voices reached his ears, hunters returning to check their snares. Terror seized him. With a last, mournful whine, Kodiak tore his paw free, blood streaming down his leg, and bolted into the trees. Max barked after him, but the cub's heavy, injured gait carried him too swiftly into the shadowed forest. Max stood alone in the snow, the echoes of Kodiak's retreat fading among the pines. His heart hammered as he followed the faint, bloodied tracks. Each paw print in the drifting snow was a promise that he would not give up. The forest stretched endlessly, each fallen log, each drifts of powder, yet Max pressed on, driven by fierce loyalty. Days passed in a blur of cold and hunger. Max scavenged for scraps beneath hidden crevices of bark, lapped icicle-melted water, and curled into himself at night to conserve warmth. His coat grew crusted with frost, his ribs pressed sharply against his side. But every time he feared he might falter, he thought of Kodiak's brave face, and his resolve renewed. On the fourth dawn, as pale light filtered through frosted branches, Max spotted a familiar dark shape huddled at the edge of a frozen creek. Kodiak lay collapsed, the makeshift bandage of moss and bark soaked with blood. With trembling jaws, Max returned to the clearing where the trap had lain, tugged at its rusted jaws until they creaked open, and dragged it back to Kodiak. The cub whimpered as Max gently worked the mechanism free, then collapsed in relief. Though weak and wounded, Kodiak nuzzled Max with gratitude. As the snow drifted down around them, the two friends, separated by pain but reunited by unbreakable loyalty, leaned on one another, their bond reforged in the heart of winter's cruelty. When the first green shoots of spring pierced the snowdrifts, the forest stirred with new life. Melting ice dripped from tangled branches, and the air carried the sharp sweetness of thawing earth. Kodiak's leg had healed enough that he could walk without a pronounced limp, though the faint pink scar remained as a reminder of his ordeal. Max's coat had grown thick and glossy once more, and he padded beside Kodiak with his usual exuberance, tail wagging in time with each footfall. Their journey led them back to the broad, familiar clearing by the riverbank, the place where their story began. Kodiak paused at the water's edge, inhaling the scent of rushing currents and warm stones. Beside him, Max dipped a cautious paw into the cool water, then splashed joyfully, sending droplets sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. For a long moment, they simply stood side by side, two very different creatures bound by an unbreakable bond. Word of their extraordinary friendship had spread among the nearby ranger station and a small group of wildlife rehabilitators. That afternoon, as Kodiak nosed at a tuft of fresh grass, a gentle voice called his name. Emerging from the tree line came Ranger Lena, carrying a satchel of wildflower seeds and pet treats. Behind her, Dr. Patel, the volunteer vet who had tended Kodiak's trap injury, approached with a collar-sized tracking tag in hand. Max's ears perked, and he bounded over, pressing his muzzle into her coat in greeting. The humans knelt in the soft grass, stroking Kodiak's broad shoulders and fastening the tag around his neck. Max sat patiently, allowing the moment to stretch out. Max's former rescuer, a kindly forest guide named Tomas, appeared next, offering Max a new braided leash embroidered with both his and Kodiak's names. Together, they formed an unlikely family, human and animal allies celebrating survival and trust. Yet as dusk fell and the fireflies began their lantern dance, Kodiak and Max exchanged a look, one of shared understanding. They'd survived hunger, injury, fear, and separation by relying on each other's strengths. Now that the world around them welcomed their companionship, they didn't need earthly names or human trappings to define who they were. With one final lick to each caretaker's hand, they slipped quietly back into the forest's embrace. Ranger Lena and Tomas watched them go, hearts full, knowing some bonds must remain wild. Deep in the woods, Kodiak ambled beside Max, the roar of the river their soundtrack and the canopy of budding leaves their shelter. In the fresh spring air, two hearts beat as one, a bear and a dog whose friendship transcended species, fear, and fate, a living testament that true companionship knows no bounds.